In the war-torn universe of Warhammer 40k, where the very fabric of reality is shredded by constant strife and the unceasing advance of darkness, there exists a force unlike any other, a sacred order of warriors who embody the pinnacle of martial prowess, unwavering loyalty, and divine purpose. They are not mere soldiers, but the Emperor's chosen, the Adeptus Custodes. When the Imperium was forged in the fires of the Great Crusade, and humanity sought to expand its dominion across the stars, one being stood above all others, the Emperor of mankind. But even the Emperor, who possessed godlike power, needed guardians to protect him from threats both mundane and arcane. The Emperor's elite warriors, the Custodes, were forged in his own image. The Custodians are not only his personal bodyguards, but the living embodiment of his will, their existence intertwined with his divine purpose. Unlike the Imperium's many legions, which were composed of countless soldiers bred for war, the Adeptus Custodes were something far more unique. They were created with an unparalleled combination of gene engineering and ancient technologies, designed to be living weapons with supreme strength, agility, and intellect. But their role was never to fight in the countless wars of the Imperium. Instead, they were the silent, watchful sentinels who ensured the Emperor's safety and protected his sacred throne on Terra. They were always present, standing in the shadows of the Emperor's palace, but only a few ever truly knew their full extent. The Adeptus Custodes, as a force, remain a mystery to most within the Imperium. Their number is minuscule compared to the vast legions of the Astra Militarum or the Space Marines, yet they are among the most lethal and powerful warriors ever to walk the universe. They are not mere soldiers. They are the Emperor's will incarnate, forever bound to his protection and service. And yet, in this age of endless war, when the Emperor lies in his golden throne, a husk of his former glory, the Custodes face a new role. Their vigil has not ended, but their task has changed. While the Officio Assassinorum silently removes threats to the Imperium with stealth and precision, the Custodes operate with open might and unmatched authority. Where the assassins are shadows in the night, the Custodes are the shining, indomitable force that brings justice to those who would harm the Emperor's domain. They have seen the worst the galaxy has to offer, from the horrors of the Chaos Gods to the terrible alien empires that threaten mankind. They are not only defenders, but now they are warriors on the front lines. But in this era of ever-present war, the Custodes' path is uncertain. For centuries, their role was defined solely by their loyalty to the Emperor. Yet, as the Imperium splinters under the weight of corruption and constant threats, they find themselves at a crossroads. The Emperor is no longer a living force of will, but a silent god in his golden throne. The question now is, what becomes of the Custodes, those who were once the ultimate protectors of a god-king, when the very empire they have sworn to defend begins to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions? The Custodes are faced with a choice. Will they remain steadfast in their eternal vigil, protecting a broken emperor, or will they take a more active role in the future of the Imperium? The answers to these questions have profound implications for the fate of humanity, the Imperium, and perhaps the entire galaxy itself. The Adeptus Custodes are a force that stands as a reminder of what humanity once was, a shining beacon of strength and loyalty in an ever-darkening universe. But as the galaxy plunges deeper into chaos, their continued vigilance may be the last hope for the Imperium's survival. Or perhaps it may herald a new chapter in their service, where they must decide what it truly means to serve the Emperor, even in death. This is their story, the tale of the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's unyielding guardians, and their role in the uncertain future of mankind. The Adeptus Custodes are the Emperor's ultimate warriors, crafted in his image, designed to be the most perfect and most loyal protectors of mankind. They were conceived at the dawn of the Imperium, at the height of the Emperor's power, when the Great Crusade surged through the stars, uniting humanity and crushing all who would stand in its way. But the Custodes were not created to march alongside the Emperor's vast legions in their campaigns. Their purpose was singular, clear, and unyielding. They were to guard the Emperor himself. Unlike the vast host of the Space Marines, whose Primarchs were birthed from the Emperor's own genetic genius, the Custodes were his direct creation. In their very being, they contained the pinnacle of his genetic engineering. These warriors were not only the Emperor's most perfect creations, but were also his personal chosen. Each was designed to exceed human limits of strength, speed, and intellect. In battle, they were unparalleled, capable of feats that no mortal could ever match. But it was not just their physical perfection that made them stand apart. It was their unwavering devotion, their eternal bond with the Emperor, and their solemn vow to protect him above all else. The Custodes' number was always small compared to the vast armies that the Imperium would raise during the Great Crusade. Where the Space Marine legions numbered in the tens of thousands, the Adeptus Custodes were kept at a secretive and carefully controlled number, each warrior handpicked and chosen for their extraordinary skills. This was deliberate. They were not a force intended to conquer worlds, but to stand as living shields against all threats to the Emperor. The Emperor's palace on Terra was their sacred charge, and they were its guardians. Every corner, every chamber of the Emperor's domain was watched by the ever-vigilant eyes of the Custodes. Though the Emperor's palace was their primary duty, they were not isolated from the greater events of the galaxy. When the Great Crusade erupted into full force, and the Emperor marched to forge a new age for mankind, the Custodes were never far behind. Their role in these campaigns, however, was often more discreet. While the Emperor's armies would engage in battle across the stars, the Custodes remained at his side, ever ready to intervene should the need arise. Their actions were few and far between, for their role was not to wage war, but to ensure that the Emperor remained unscathed. As the Great Crusade unfolded, the Custodes watched the Emperor's vision for the Imperium expand, and they saw the rise of the Space Marine legions, powerful super soldiers born from the Emperor's own blood. But even as the Emperor's army grew ever stronger, the Custodes remained in their protective roles, guarding their Emperor's person with unswerving loyalty. There were moments of great tension, though, when the Custodes would be called upon to act. During the Age of Strife, when the Imperium was fractured by internecine wars and the rise of traitors within, the Custodes found themselves involved in a number of covert operations. They would operate in the shadows, executing precise strikes against enemies of the Emperor. However, these missions were few, for the Custodes' primary duty was to remain at the Emperor's side. One of the most crucial moments in the Custodes' history was the tragic and catastrophic event known as the Heresy. The traitorous actions of half the Emperor's own sons, the Space Marine Primarchs and their legions, plunged the galaxy into a civil war that threatened to tear the Imperium apart. The Custodes, as loyal servants to the Emperor, took an active role in the events that unfolded, but their actions were shrouded in secrecy. They stood firm by the Emperor's side during the Siege of Terra, when the walls of the Imperial Palace were breached and the very survival of humanity was at stake. The Custodes were at the front lines during the Siege of Terra, fighting alongside the Emperor's most loyal forces to stave off the traitor legions. Though they had never been warriors of the battlefield in the same way the Space Marines were, they were still formidable, and when the Emperor was finally forced to confront his fallen son, Horus, on the battle-worn surface of Terra, the Custodes fought with the same ferocity and devotion that had always defined them. However, even the Custodes could not save the Emperor from the ultimate fate that awaited him. As the Emperor fell, his body was irrevocably wounded by Horus, and he was placed upon the Golden Throne, an ancient life support device that would keep him alive but bound to his eternal prison. In the wake of the Horus Heresy, the Custodes' role would change forever. In the aftermath of the heresy, the Adeptus Custodes withdrew to Terra, their primary responsibility now to the protection of the Emperor's sanctified body. They maintained a vigilant watch over the Golden Throne, ensuring that no traitor, no force of darkness, would be able to disturb his eternal rest. The Imperium, now fractured and in decline, could no longer rely on the Emperor to lead them as he once had. Instead, the Imperium turned to the vast armies that had been birthed in the Great Crusade, relying on the Space Marines to defend mankind from the endless threats that encircled them. But the Custodes stood alone in their holy duty, bound to the Emperor and his throne. Throughout the millennia following the Horus Heresy, the Custodes rarely ventured beyond Terra. They watched as the Imperium, now ruled by the High Lords of Terra in the Emperor's name, was torn asunder by corruption, heresy, and the unrelenting horrors of the galaxy. They saw the rise of chaos, the incursions of alien races, and the countless disasters that befell the Imperium. Yet they remained resolute. Their role had never been to lead armies, nor to wage war on a galactic scale. Their task was one of eternal vigilance. But in recent times, a subtle shift has begun to occur. As the Imperium faces the grimdark future of the 41st millennium, with its enemies closing in on all sides and the Emperor's strength diminished, the Custodes have begun to take a more active role in the defense of the Imperium. Once confined to the halls of the Imperial Palace, the Custodes now patrol the stars, intervening directly in the wars and conflicts that threaten humanity's survival. The galaxy is no longer the one that the Emperor had envisioned. It is a shattered, broken place filled with ancient enemies and new threats alike. Yet, the Adeptus Custodes stand as they always have, silent, unyielding, and ready to strike down any foe who dares threaten the Imperium. They are the Emperor's chosen, his perfect warriors, bound by their sacred oath to protect him and his Imperium, no matter the cost. And so, the story of the Adeptus Custodes continues. Their vigilance never wanes, and their loyalty to the Emperor remains steadfast, even in the face of an uncertain future. What role they will play in the dark times ahead, however, is yet to be seen. But one thing is certain: no matter how the galaxy changes, the Custodes will remain, ever watchful, ever ready to defend humanity from the horrors that lie beyond the stars. The origins of the Adeptus Custodes stretch back to the very creation of the Imperium itself, woven into the fabric of the Emperor's grand design. But the story of their existence is not simply one of genetic perfection and martial prowess. It is a tale of duty, sacrifice, and an unbroken vow to a purpose greater than any individual or even empire. The Custodes were never meant to be mere soldiers. They were conceived as the Emperor's eternal guardians, and it was their sacred charge to protect him in his most vulnerable state. In the earliest days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor led the forces of humanity to unify the stars, the need for a personal guard became apparent. While his armies, the Space Marine legions, laid waste to any who opposed him, there was no force capable of standing as a personal bulwark against the more insidious threats. Assassins, conspirators, and dark powers lurked, waiting for an opportunity to strike at the heart of the Imperium. The Emperor, whose mind spanned galaxies, could not afford to be distracted by such concerns. And so he turned to a method as old as time itself: gene manipulation. The Custodes were born from the Emperor's own genetic code, crafted to be not only superhuman, but in a sense divine in their perfection. Their creation was not a process of simple cloning. It was a meticulous effort involving ancient and advanced technology, blending biology, alchemy, and arcane rituals to produce beings of unimaginable skill and loyalty. Each custodian was physically unmatched, their strength, speed, and reflexes honed to an unimaginable degree. They were also enhanced in intellect, making them capable of complex strategies and an understanding of the Emperor's vision far beyond that of ordinary men. But their most profound quality was not their physical perfection or intellectual prowess. It was their absolute devotion. The Custodes were not just created to be the Emperor's bodyguards. They were imbued with a sense of duty that transcended all others. They were bound to the Emperor by an oath that had no end, a duty that could never be broken, not even in the face of death. Their bond to him was not one of servitude, but of love and unwavering loyalty. They were his eternal protectors, not simply in battle, but in every aspect of his existence. This bond shaped the Custodes not only as soldiers, but as something more, as the ultimate expression of the Emperor's will. Their role, however, was never one of conquest. Unlike the legions of Space Marines, whose fates were bound to the war-torn galaxy, the Custodes were not meant to travel the stars in pursuit of glory or power. Their duty was to remain in the heart of the Imperium, guarding Terra and the Emperor himself. The Custodes were not a force to spread the Emperor's light across the galaxy. They were a force to ensure that no harm ever came to the source of that light. The Imperial Palace on the world of Terra was their domain, and they stood as silent sentinels in its many halls and chambers. In their early years, the Custodes were nearly an enigma even to the larger Imperium. Only a handful of individuals knew their true role and purpose. To the average citizen of the Imperium, the Custodes were a mythical presence, whispers of their existence passed down through generations but rarely seen. They were not an active fighting force, for their presence was often subtle, a quiet reminder that the Emperor's protection was never far away. But though the Custodes kept their vigil largely in the shadows, their influence was felt across the Imperium. The Emperor's commands were carried out through them, whether in the form of the more subtle political maneuverings of the High Lords of Terra, or in direct action against internal threats to the Imperium. As protectors of the Emperor, the Custodes were also entrusted with the defense of the Imperial Court, which over time became a place of immense political intrigue. Here, the Custodes did more than protect. They shaped the destiny of the Imperium in subtle ways, ensuring that no threat could slip through the cracks and strike at the heart of the Emperor's realm. Yet, as the millennia passed, their role began to shift. With the tragic events of the Horus Heresy and the Emperor's fall, the Custodes found themselves in a position they had never anticipated. The Emperor, once the living embodiment of strength and purpose, was now a dying god, confined to the Golden Throne, an unfeeling life support device that kept him alive but unable to engage with the galaxy. The Adeptus Custodes, once the defenders of a living, breathing Emperor, were now tasked with preserving the sanctity of his throne and keeping his essence, for lack of a better word, untarnished. The changes within the Imperium itself also began to alter the nature of the Custodes' role. The Emperor's death, or rather, his state of eternal stasis, meant that the Custodes could no longer simply watch over him as they had done in the past. The Imperium was under siege, not just from external threats, but from internal decay. Corruption had set deep within the ranks of the Imperium, from the political structures of the High Lords to the very military might of the Astra Militarum and the Space Marines. The Custodes, once silent and distant, now had to engage more directly in the fate of the galaxy, for it was clear that if humanity was to survive, the forces of chaos, corruption, and alien invasion would have to be met head-on. The problem, however, was not just external. With the Emperor removed from the battlefield, the leadership of the Imperium was fragmented, and the Custodes were faced with a difficult dilemma. Their purpose had always been to protect the Emperor, but now, without his direct leadership, who were they to protect? The Imperium was ruled by a council of the High Lords, a collective that had neither the strength nor the wisdom to lead humanity through the trials ahead. The Custodes began to question their role within this fractured Imperium. Were they still just guardians of the Emperor's throne, or was there a greater destiny awaiting them? In the centuries that followed, the Custodes took on a more proactive stance. As the Imperium grew increasingly desperate, facing threats on every front, the Custodes began to step beyond the walls of the Imperial Palace. No longer were they mere watchers. They became warriors once again. The universe beyond Terra was no longer the domain of the Emperor alone, but the battleground of humanity's survival. The Custodes had always been the finest warriors in existence, but now they were called to prove that they were the last line of defense for the Imperium itself. Despite the galaxy's decline, the Custodes have not wavered in their duty. With every passing century, their numbers have remained constant, though their role has evolved. Their faith in the Emperor remains unwavering, though he is no longer able to guide them in the way he once did. They remain a symbol of strength, not just in their martial prowess, but in their dedication to a cause that transcends time, a cause that speaks to the very heart of humanity's survival. And so, the Custodes continue, ever vigilant. The Imperium may falter, but their oaths will not break. They are the Emperor's chosen, his eternal protectors, and no matter the cost, they will endure. As the darkness of the 41st millennium spreads, the Custodes stand as a reminder of humanity's lost glory, and perhaps of the hope that it can yet be reclaimed. The Adeptus Custodes, guardians of the Emperor's sacred throne and protectors of Terra, were not born of happenstance, nor were they shaped by the same forces that birthed the other warrior legions of the Imperium. Their creation was an act of divine foresight, a deliberate and unique response to the Emperor's understanding of the galaxy's perils. Unlike the Space Marines, who were designed for conquest and war, the Custodes were forged with an entirely different purpose in mind. They were not intended to be commanders of armies, nor were they to be the vanguard of the Emperor's crusades across the stars. Their destiny was one of vigilance, and their weapons were not just forged for battle, but for eternity. At their core, the Custodes were always meant to be few in number, never swelling into the ranks of vast armies or regiments. Their role was one of selective precision, not brute force. Each warrior was a masterpiece of genetic engineering and ancient science, a creation born from the Emperor's will. While the Space Marines had the Primarchs, the Custodes had no such equals. Each one was a singular expression of the Emperor's purpose, infused with his wisdom and strength, but ultimately operating in complete cohesion, not under the command of any one leader. This unique creation was not accidental. The Custodes were intended to be an extension of the Emperor's own will, and in many ways they were his direct heirs in terms of both physical might and intellectual capacity. Their powers far surpassed those of even the most elite of the Astartes. While Space Marines were superhuman soldiers, the Custodes were superhuman beings, each an individual force of nature, capable of feats beyond the scope of ordinary mortal comprehension. The Custodes were first deployed in a capacity that few outside their order could comprehend. Their original task was not one of military conquest, but of protection. In the early days of the Imperium, there were few external threats that could challenge the Emperor. But as time passed, it became clear that the Emperor's own actions, his rise to power, and his ultimate goal of uniting humanity were bound to create enemies both within and beyond the stars. To combat these threats, the Custodes were positioned at key points, both on Terra and in the Emperor's personal sphere, ensuring that no assassin, no agent of sabotage, nor no enemy of the Imperium could reach their lord. They were not simply bodyguards, they were sentinels tasked with ensuring the Emperor's will remained undisturbed in both life and death. As the Imperium grew in scope, the Custodes became an integral part of the larger framework of the Emperor's rule. They did not involve themselves in the day-to-day governance of the Imperium. This was the task of the imperial bureaucracy. But they were always present in the halls of power, moving quietly in the background, ready to act should the Emperor's authority be threatened. This subtle but ever-present influence allowed the Custodes to maintain a level of power and control that most would never even recognize. Few were able to comprehend the extent of their presence, as the Custodes operated with a quiet efficiency that was unparalleled. The Custodes did not serve the Imperium as a whole. Their loyalty was not to the Imperium as an abstract political entity, but to the Emperor as a living god. They were his servants, his protectors, and in many ways, they were the perfect reflection of his divine purpose. It was only when the Horus Heresy, an event that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of the Imperium, began to unfold that the true power of the Custodes would come to the forefront. Though they had remained largely hidden during the Great Crusade, keeping their distance from the galaxy-spanning wars and conflicts that raged in the Emperor's name, the rise of Horus and his rebellion against the Emperor demanded a different response. The Horus Heresy was an unprecedented tragedy for the Imperium, and for the Custodes it was a trial of faith and purpose. Though they had never been created to wage war on such a scale, the Custodes understood that the time had come for them to take up arms, not just as guardians of the Emperor, but as defenders of the Imperium's future. As the traitor legions, led by Horus, advanced toward Terra, the Custodes were forced to confront their own role within the collapsing Imperium. They had spent centuries in the shadows, watching, waiting, but now they would be called to the forefront in a way they had never anticipated. During the Siege of Terra, the Custodes were not passive spectators. While much of the Emperor's legions fought to defend the palace, the Custodes took a more active role in the war, engaging the traitor forces in a series of brutal, decisive confrontations. It was here that the true measure of their power became apparent. Though they had never before fought in such large numbers, and though their primary purpose had been protection rather than combat, the Custodes demonstrated that they were more than capable of holding their own against the traitor legions. Their tactical acumen, combined with their unmatched combat skills, made them formidable foes, capable of taking on the greatest warriors of the traitor forces, including the formidable Space Marines. Yet, as the Siege of Terra reached its tragic conclusion, the Custodes found themselves in a strange position. Despite their unmatched prowess and unshakable loyalty, they could not prevent the Emperor's death at the hands of Horus. The Emperor, though victorious in his final confrontation with his son, was grievously wounded, and it was clear that the future of the Imperium would be forever altered. In the aftermath of the heresy, the Custodes once again withdrew into their role as guardians, but now their task had changed. They were no longer simply tasked with protecting a living, breathing emperor, but rather with ensuring the preservation of his legacy. For millennia after the heresy, the Custodes remained silent and steadfast in their watch over the Golden Throne. Their numbers dwindled, not through attrition, but because they had always been few in number, and over time, the Imperium's resources were stretched thin. Despite this, the Custodes continued their eternal vigil, and over time their presence within the Imperium became a silent symbol of a bygone era, a time when humanity had known hope, when the Emperor had walked among them. Yet, as the galaxy continued to spiral into chaos, a new, more dire threat emerged, and the Custodes found themselves once again forced to engage in a larger conflict. The resurgence of the forces of chaos, the endless alien threats that sought to undermine humanity's survival, and the internal strife that plagued the Imperium all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. The Adeptus Custodes could no longer remain isolated within the walls of Terra. The time had come for them to take up arms once more, not as passive watchers but as active defenders of the Imperium, standing against the darkness that threatened to consume it. In this new age of war, the Custodes have emerged as one of the Imperium's most formidable forces. While their numbers are still few, their skills and purpose have never been more vital. They now travel the stars, intervening directly in key conflicts and wars, ever loyal to the Emperor's cause. They fight not for glory nor for honor, but for the survival of humanity, for the preservation of a legacy that has long since faded into myth. The Adeptus Custodes are no longer merely the silent sentinels of a dead god. They are the last bastion of hope for the Imperium, the embodiment of an ancient promise, and the force that will stand against the tide of darkness that threatens to engulf everything. Their journey is not one of conquest nor of ambition, but of duty. Duty to a vision that, though obscured by the ravages of time, has never wavered. And as the Imperium faces its darkest hour, the Adeptus Custodes stand resolute, ever vigilant, ever watchful, knowing that the battle for humanity's future has only just begun. Their role in this struggle is far from over, and their purpose, though shrouded in the mysteries of their past, remains as clear as ever. They are the Emperor's chosen, and they will not falter in their eternal duty to protect mankind. The battlefields of the 41st Millennium are unlike any other in the history of humanity, a time when countless enemies converge on the Imperium in a storm of war, betrayal, and death. Yet, even in this grim and unyielding epic, the Adeptus Custodes stand as an unbroken bastion, an ever-vigilant force that guards the Imperium's most sacred relic, the Emperor's throne. Their role in this tumultuous age has never been more crucial, and as the galaxy slips further into chaos, the Custodes are drawn into a greater struggle for survival, not just of humanity, but of the Emperor's very legacy. The Imperium itself, once an empire that spanned the stars and thrived under the Emperor's watchful eye, is now a fractured and decaying relic of its former glory. Despite this, the Adeptus Custodes have remained an unyielding force, determined to fulfill the sacred charge entrusted to them since their inception, to protect the Emperor and, by extension, the Imperium of man. But as the dark tide of the galaxy encroaches ever closer, the Custodes must come to terms with their place in this decaying empire. They are not merely a remnant of a bygone age. They are the last remaining hope of humanity, a living testament to the Emperor's vision of a united human race. In the 41st millennium, this vision seems more distant than ever, and the forces arrayed against mankind grow ever more insidious, ever more insurmountable. The ancient oaths sworn by the Custodes bind them not only to the Emperor, but to the very soul of the Imperium. The Custodes have watched over Terra, its people, its throne, and its history for millennia. They are not just the Emperor's most trusted bodyguards. They are his custodians, the stewards of humanity's future in a universe that is slowly being consumed by darkness. And yet, their role, once one of passive vigilance, has evolved as the galaxy has grown darker, more hostile. The time for passive protection has long passed, and the Custodes must once again take up arms, not just to defend Terra, but to strike out against the enemies of mankind wherever they may be found. In the aftermath of the Great Heresy and the Emperor's ascension to the Golden Throne, the Adeptus Custodes retreated into their fortress on Terra, bound by their sacred duty to protect the Emperor. For many millennia, they remained aloof from the greater conflicts that ravaged the Imperium. Their place was not in the field of battle, but rather in the shadowed halls of the Imperial Palace, ensuring that no enemy, no treacherous soul, would ever breach the sanctity of the Emperor's presence. They were protectors, and their vigilance was absolute. But as the forces of chaos and alien invaders continued to ravage the galaxy, the Custodes began to realize that their protective role could no longer be confined to Terra alone. The emergence of the great threats facing the Imperium in the 41st millennium, the insidious power of chaos, the horrific alien races that encroach upon humanity's dominion, and the internal rot that festers within the very institutions of the Imperium has forced the Custodes to reconsider their role in the galaxy. No longer can they afford to remain confined to their protective watch over the Emperor's throne. Their oaths demand action, for the very survival of the Imperium is at stake. Yet, as they step onto the battlefields of the future, they must confront a galaxy that is not the one they once knew. The foes they face are no longer mere rebels, heretics, or aliens, but the very forces of the warp itself, an existential threat to all of humanity. The Adeptus Custodes are a force of singular power, their warriors the epitome of martial skill, genetic perfection, and unshakable loyalty. They have no peers, and yet they stand at the crossroads of the Imperium's fate, forced to confront an array of enemies that no one individual, no single force, could hope to overcome alone. Each custodian is a living weapon, an avatar of the Emperor's will, and yet they are few in number. Their presence in the galaxy is a rare and significant event, for they are the ultimate expression of humanity's power in the most trying of times. As the forces of chaos unleash their greatest demonic hordes, and the ancient alien races such as the Tyranids, Orcs, and Necrons stir from their slumber, the Custodes are called upon to confront these myriad threats, not just on Terra, but in the farthest reaches of the Imperium. Their presence is a rare and dangerous thing, for the Custodes are never sent to battle lightly. When they do intervene, it is a statement, a symbol of the Emperor's will, and their actions can tip the scales of entire conflicts. The Custodes' role in the Imperium has evolved beyond that of mere defenders of the Emperor. They are now active participants in the galaxy-spanning war for humanity's survival. Their interventions in key battles are legendary, their actions shaping the outcome of entire campaigns. Whether it is the intervention of a single custodian to thwart the machinations of a chaos warlord, or the deployment of a full force to repel a Tyranid hive fleet or an orc invasion, the Custodes' involvement in these battles is always decisive. They do not fight for glory or personal gain. Their purpose is singular: to protect humanity, to safeguard the Emperor's dream, and to defend the Imperium against the forces that would see it destroyed. In these dark times, the Custodes stand not only as the Emperor's chosen warriors, but as the last line of defense for the Imperium itself. Their numbers may be small, their forces few, but their impact is immeasurable. When they strike, they do so with the fury of the Emperor's will behind them, and their enemies are left with no doubt as to the consequences of crossing the Emperor's chosen. The Custodes are a symbol of humanity's strength, even in the face of insurmountable odds. Their intervention in key battles has turned the tide of war, and their continued presence in the galaxy serves as a reminder to all who would threaten the Imperium that the Emperor's guardians are never far behind. The galaxy is a dark and hostile place, and the Imperium is beset on all sides by enemies that seek its destruction. Yet, in the face of this overwhelming darkness, the Adeptus Custodes remain an unyielding beacon of hope. They are not the leaders of vast armies, nor do they command the legions of the Astra Militarum or the Space Marines. They are the Emperor's hand, his eyes, and his will made manifest. In this age of darkness, they are the last, the best, the most loyal of his warriors. In a time where the Imperium teeters on the edge of annihilation, the Adeptus Custodes have stepped forward once more to protect it. Their role, long dormant, has been resurrected as the Custodes now battle against the greatest threats the galaxy has ever known. They are the last guardians of the Imperium's greatest secret, the Emperor's eternal will, and they stand as humanity's final hope against the forces that seek to engulf them. The galaxy may burn and the stars may fall, but as long as the Adeptus Custodes stand, the Imperium will endure, for they are the Emperor's eternal warriors, and their vigilance will never waver. Thus, as the universe around them crumbles and the enemies of mankind gather, the Adeptus Custodes remain resolute. With their undying loyalty, their indomitable will, and their unwavering devotion to the Emperor's cause, they will continue to defend the Imperium and his legacy. Their fight is one that will never end, for it is a battle that transcends time itself. The Custodes will endure, forever guarding the Emperor's throne, and in doing so, guarding humanity's last hope for survival. The Adeptus Custodes, guardians of the Emperor's golden throne, were forged for an eternity of vigilance. Their purpose has been one of protection, an ancient oath that binds them not just to Terra, but to the very future of humanity. But while their presence has remained constant, the universe around them has changed. The galaxy they once protected with silent watchfulness has grown darker, more dangerous, and the threats they face now are unlike those of any previous age. The question that now looms over the Custodes is whether they can still fulfill their sacred charge as they are drawn further into the galactic maelstrom. The time for merely watching over the Emperor's throne has passed, and the forces arrayed against humanity grow ever more insidious. The galaxy is aflame, torn by the chaos wars, the endless tides of Xenos invasions, and the crumbling might of the Imperium itself. With the fall of the Imperial Webway project, the power of humanity's once great star empires now lies in tatters, its vast infrastructure a mere shadow of its former self. And within the Imperium, corruption festers. The sacred oaths and ideals once held dear have been tainted by self-interest, bureaucratic stagnation, and the slow creeping decay of a system that is too large to function coherently. The Imperium is in decline, and it seems as though the age of humanity's greatness is long behind it. In this dark age, the Adeptus Custodes must grapple with an uncomfortable truth. Despite their unmatched power and dedication, they are mere witnesses to a universe in decline. The golden era they were born to defend is gone, and the Emperor's vision of humanity's unified future is becoming a distant and almost mythical ideal. The Custodes have always been few in number, but now their role is not just to protect, but to confront the challenges that threaten the very survival of the human race. The threat of chaos is perhaps the most insidious of all. The forces of the warp, those ancient powers that feed on the emotions and suffering of mortals, have always been a presence in the galaxy. But as the 41st millennium has unfolded, they have grown ever more brazen in their efforts to corrupt and destroy humanity. The forces of chaos do not fight in the traditional sense. They do not seek to conquer, but to dismantle, to corrupt, and to subvert. They work from within, exploiting the weaknesses of the Imperium, turning brothers against each other, and twisting the very fabric of human society. The Custodes, however, are not so easily corrupted. They are the Emperor's chosen, and their purity is unmatched. The psychic gifts that many of the Imperium's warriors possess are not shared by the Custodes. They are not psychers, and they do not rely on the warp as a source of power. Instead, they draw their strength from the Emperor's divine will, their unmatched genetic enhancements, and the deep sense of duty that permeates every aspect of their being. Their devotion to their sacred charge is absolute, and they will not falter in the face of the greatest evils the galaxy can offer. Yet even the might of the Custodes is not enough to shield the Imperium from the relentless tide of chaos. As the forces of the warp continue to wreak havoc across the galaxy, the Custodes have been forced to intervene in conflicts far beyond the walls of Terra. They have taken the fight to the traitor legions and the twisted, foul beings of the Chaos Gods, waging a grim war against the very forces that seek to unmake the Emperor's creation. Their role as the Emperor's shield has evolved into something more active. They are now a force of retribution, an extension of the Emperor's fury, and they seek to undo the damage wrought by the forces of chaos wherever they can. But even as they wage war against chaos, the Custodes must contend with the rise of other existential threats to humanity. The galaxy is vast, and within its dark corners, many dangers stir. The ancient Necrons, with their terrifying technology and inscrutable motives, have begun to make their presence felt. The Tyranids, an endless swarm of bioengineered horrors, advance ever closer to the Imperium's borders, and the Orcs, in their chaotic and unpredictable way, remain a constant threat, wreaking havoc wherever they go. Each of these threats is unique, and each presents a different challenge for the Adeptus Custodes. Against the Necrons, the Custodes find themselves facing a foe whose sheer technological superiority and ancient, unknowable motives leave them uncertain of the way forward. The Necrons are not just enemies. They are a race that embodies the cold, calculated horror of a forgotten past, an ancient and alien civilization that has emerged from the dark void to reclaim its place in the galaxy. To battle the Necrons is to face an enemy that seems impossible to defeat, one whose strength lies not in brute force, but in millennia of technological advancement and mastery over life itself. The Tyranids are a different kind of enemy altogether. They are not driven by ideology or malice, but by an insatiable hunger to consume all life in the galaxy. The Custodes' genetic enhancements, their superior strength and skill, have proven effective against many of the Imperium's enemies, but the Tyranids present an enemy that is almost beyond comprehension. They do not fight to conquer, they fight to devour. And in their wake, the Custodes must protect the remnants of humanity from being consumed by the hive mind that drives the Tyranids forward. The Orcs, meanwhile, are perhaps the most chaotic of all the threats the Custodes face. They do not follow any kind of strategy or command structure that can be understood by the Imperium. They fight for the sheer joy of it, with an energy and ferocity that is as unpredictable as it is dangerous. Yet the Custodes, with their millennia of experience and unmatched martial prowess, are able to find a way to deal with the orcs. They may not understand the orcs' insane humor, but they know how to cut through the chaos and bring down these brutal creatures wherever they appear. Despite the growing number of threats that face them, the Custodes' strength lies in their singularity of purpose. They are not a large army, nor are they meant to be. Each custodian is an individual of unparalleled skill and power, an extension of the Emperor's will. Their training, their genetic enhancements, and their unwavering devotion to their sacred charge make them an unrivaled force in the galaxy. And while they may be few, their ability to strike decisively and change the tide of a battle is unparalleled. They are the Emperor's hammer, and they are always ready to strike when the Imperium calls upon them. Their role in the 41st Millennium is a paradox. They are relics of a forgotten age, but they are also one of the last true bulwarks against the destruction of humanity. Their interventions in the wars of the Imperium have become more frequent as the threats facing mankind have grown more dire, and yet they are still the Emperor's chosen, bound to his will alone. Even as the galaxy continues its descent into madness, the Adeptus Custodes remain ever vigilant, ready to strike at any moment, ensuring that the Emperor's dream of humanity's survival is not lost to the darkness. The age of the Custodes may be one of uncertainty, but they stand unwavering. Against the horrors of the galaxy, they are a symbol of hope, of endurance, and of unbreakable will. While the Imperium may falter, the Custodes will endure, guarding humanity's future with every breath, every strike, and every ounce of their sacred devotion. They are the last true guardians of the Emperor's dream, and they will never allow it to fade into the darkness of the galaxy. As long as there is breath in their bodies and fire in their hearts, the Adeptus Custodes will stand, the last hope for humanity in a universe that seeks its destruction. As the galaxy's stars flicker and the Imperium trembles on the brink of extinction, the Adeptus Custodes find themselves at the center of a turbulent conflict that not only threatens their sacred duty, but the very survival of humanity itself. Their role as the Emperor's chosen guardians has evolved as they confront the dark forces of the galaxy on a scale never before seen. In the past, the Custodes were the quiet, unflinching protectors of Terra, stationed at the heart of the Imperium to safeguard the Emperor's immortal form. But now, the very future of mankind depends on their ability to adapt to a galaxy rife with enemies, forces that challenge not just their martial prowess, but the very core of their existence. The Custodes' actions over the centuries have always been deliberate, often shrouded in mystery, and their presence on the battlefield rare but decisive. They have intervened in many key moments of history, but always as an elite force, a blade of the Emperor's fury that strikes only when the need is dire. Yet the sheer scale of the galaxy's fall demands more from them. As the Imperium faces endless invasions, the assault of the Chaos Gods, and the relentless march of ancient alien races, the Custodes have found themselves stretched thin, their once immovable position as silent protectors now tested to the limits. This new role they assume is not one they ever anticipated. Their genetic enhancements and formidable training had always marked them as the last line of defense in the Emperor's palace, an exclusive role that did not require their active involvement in the wars of the Imperium. Yet, as the universe descended into chaos, as the Imperium's leadership became mired in corruption and inefficiency, the Custodes realized they could no longer simply stand by and watch. The galaxy was burning, and it was time for them to take an active hand in the events unfolding across the stars. One of the primary existential threats the Custodes now face is the growing influence of chaos and the twisted legions that serve the dark gods. These once human warriors, now monstrous servants of their twisted patrons, have grown exponentially in number and strength. With the Imperium in its current state, fractured, weakened, and divided, the forces of chaos see this as an opportunity to finally topple the Imperium's last defenses. They seek not only the destruction of humanity, but the corruption of its very soul, an ambition that resonates with every battle the Custodes face. Yet, despite their unmatched power, the Custodes are fighting against an enemy that cannot be easily vanquished by conventional means. The Chaos Legions are relentless, driven by a hunger for ruination that is boundless. Their weapons are not simply forged from steel and fire, but from the very fabric of reality itself. They use the warp to strike at the Imperium from within, manipulating the very nature of existence to suit their twisted desires. The Custodes, bound by their vow to remain pure of the influence of the warp, are uniquely equipped to resist such forces. But resisting the pull of chaos is no small task. While the Custodes themselves may stand immune to the mutating touch of chaos, they are not without their weaknesses. They cannot exist in isolation. They must rely on the support of the Imperium's military forces, which are often fractured, inefficient, or plagued by corruption. Their interventions in the wars of the Imperium may tip the balance in a single battle, but the Custodes are but a single force among many. Against the armies of chaos, they stand isolated, and their actions cannot halt the corruption that spreads across the galaxy. To meet this threat, the Adeptus Custodes have forged uneasy alliances, seeking out those who can assist them in their mission. One of the most unlikely and yet critical alliances the Custodes have entered into is with the Sisters of Silence, an order of psyker hunters that serves the Imperium by hunting and neutralizing those who wield the dangerous power of the warp. These sisters, much like the Custodes themselves, are immune to the allure of chaos. They are unyielding in their quest to cleanse the galaxy of the threat of psychic corruption and have become invaluable allies in the Custodes' ongoing battle against the forces of the warp. Yet, even the alliance with the Sisters of Silence is not without its complications. These two orders, though united by a common cause, have stark differences in their approach to warfare. The Custodes are grand, regal warriors, an elite force that operates as an extension of the Emperor's will. The Sisters of Silence, in contrast, are more utilitarian, a silent order of warriors who live in the shadows, operating from the dark corners of the galaxy. Where the Custodes are the Emperor's radiant guardians, the Sisters are the unseen hand, moving with stealth and purpose, eradicating threats before they can manifest fully. The Custodes fight openly, using their superior combat prowess and weapons to bring the Emperor's wrath to the battlefield. The Sisters strike in secret, quietly and without fanfare, ensuring that the worst threats are neutralized before they can spread. Despite these differences, the Custodes have learned to work with the Sisters of Silence, forming a potent force that represents the Emperor's wrath, both in the light and in the dark. This unique partnership has allowed the Custodes to focus on the broader threats of chaos and its legions, while the Sisters work to eliminate any traces of psychic corruption that might fester within the Imperium's ranks. The Imperium's war with chaos, however, is not the only conflict that the Adeptus Custodes face. As the galaxy spirals into a new age of war, the forces of alien races, Xenos, threaten humanity on an unprecedented scale. While the Custodes have always dealt with the forces of the alien in the shadows of Terra, now they find themselves drawn into battles on the galactic stage. The rise of the Tyranids, an extragalactic species that consumes entire planets, threatens to overwhelm the Imperium. The Orcs, a rampant and chaotic force, wage war without reason, tearing through systems with violent abandon. And the Necrons, ancient and inscrutable, with their impossible technology and relentless march to reclaim their dominion, loom ever closer to the Imperium's borders. Each of these alien forces poses a unique challenge for the Custodes, testing their adaptability and forcing them to fight in ways they never imagined. Against the Tyranids, their superior martial skills and equipment allow them to engage in close combat with the Swarm, but the sheer number of the Tyranids makes a direct confrontation with their horde a challenge even for the Custodes' mighty ranks. With the Orcs, the Custodes must fight not only with steel and fire, but with the patience and discipline required to overcome an enemy that thrives on sheer chaos and unpredictability. and with the Necrons, they face an enemy whose technology is so far beyond the Imperium's understanding that even the Custodes, with their centuries of knowledge, struggle to find a means of victory. In the face of these varied threats, the Adeptus Custodes must learn to adapt. Their role as protectors of Terra has now evolved into a broader mission: to protect humanity, to push back against the forces of chaos, and to defend the Imperium from the many enemies that seek its destruction. The Custodes are not just defenders anymore. They are the spearhead of humanity's final stand against the dark forces of the galaxy. The battles they fight may be fought on distant planets, far from the Emperor's throne, but the stakes remain the same: the very survival of the human race. In their ongoing struggle against the galaxy's darkest forces, the Adeptus Custodes continue to evolve, adapting to meet the growing threats in ways that would have once been unimaginable. From allies like the Sisters of Silence to their desperate battles against the Tyrannid Hive fleets, the Custodes are learning that they must change, they must innovate, and they must act decisively. Their new role as active participants in the wars of the Imperium is a difficult one, and it is not one they take lightly. But as the Imperium faces destruction on all fronts, the Custodes remain steadfast, determined to fulfill their sacred oath, to protect humanity, to defend the Emperor's legacy, and to stand as the last bulwark against the encroaching darkness. The Adeptus Custodes, ever the watchful guardians of the Emperor's eternal throne, find themselves in a time of profound uncertainty. They are not merely the Emperor's personal defenders, guarding his resting form within the Golden Throne. They are the last of an ancient and powerful line, guardians of a dying Imperium, and now, in this age of darkness, they have become reluctant leaders in a war that spans galaxies. What was once a duty, a sacred oath to protect and observe, has become an active campaign to save humanity from the very forces that seek to undo it. This shift in the Custodes' role comes not without its challenges. For centuries, their role has been one of defense and stability. The vast swaths of the galaxy's population had little to no knowledge of the Adeptus Custodes, save for the vague legends of their might and unwavering loyalty to the Emperor. They were a symbol of the Emperor's glory, an elite and nearly mythical force stationed at the heart of the Imperium. Even when the wars of the Imperium raged across the stars, the Custodes stayed silent and unmoving. They existed to protect Terra and its ruler, not to fight in the countless battles of the Imperium. But as the age of humanity has grown darker, as new and old threats alike converge upon the Imperium's fringes, the Adeptus Custodes have been drawn into the conflict like never before. This has been a slow, reluctant shift, but one that has now reached its zenith. The Custodes must engage, adapt, and act as they never have before. The battles are no longer contained within the walls of the Imperial Palace, no longer isolated to the defense of the Emperor's throne. Now, the galaxy is at war, and the Custodes are at the very center of it. They have been thrust into the vanguard of humanity's last stand, leading the charge into enemy territory and fighting alongside the disparate and fractured forces of the Imperium. The greatest threat of all is the overwhelming tide of chaos. The dark forces of the warp have always lurked at the edges of the Imperium, waiting for the right moment to strike, but in the 41st millennium, chaos has found its opportunity. The birth of the Great Rift, a wound in the fabric of space-time, has torn the galaxy apart, destabilizing the Imperium and creating an environment in which the forces of chaos are free to wreak havoc with impunity. The warp's influence has seeped into every corner of the Imperium, corrupting and distorting the very fabric of reality. It is here that the Custodes find themselves fighting against a threat that is not of flesh and bone, but of the very essence of creation itself. Chaos is a force beyond the comprehension of the human mind, its power drawn from the emotions, fears, and desires of mortal souls. It is the antithesis of everything the Emperor fought to create, an unending, corrupting tide that feeds on the decay of civilization. The Chaos Gods, each embodying a different facet of humanity's darker nature, have poured their forces into the Imperium, determined to unmake everything the Emperor once stood for. The Custodes, impervious to the pull of the warp, are uniquely suited to resist the Chaos forces, but that does not mean they are immune. The battle against Chaos is one of pure willpower, and even the might of the Custodes can be tested in the face of such overwhelming odds. In their crusade against Chaos, the Custodes are not alone. The Imperium, despite its many failings, still boasts legions of warriors willing to fight for the Emperor's cause. Yet, the Custodes find themselves at the head of this crusade, with their battle strategies and overwhelming presence bringing hope to a galaxy on the brink of destruction. They do not command entire legions, nor do they lead vast swaths of humanity's military forces. Their might, however, is concentrated in the form of the Adeptus Custodes themselves. Where others lead with armies, the Custodes lead by example, fighting at the front lines of battle with unmatched skill, their every move a demonstration of their unshakable dedication to the Emperor's vision. The Adeptus Custodes are not merely warriors. They are a reflection of the Emperor's own majesty and might. Their genetic enhancements, their unparalleled combat training, and their deep connection to the Emperor make them not just soldiers but living legends. Their very presence inspires those around them to greater acts of courage and heroism, reminding the Imperium of the strength and will that still resides within humanity, even in the face of its greatest enemies. When they march into battle, their golden armor gleaming beneath the stars, they are a symbol of humanity's last hope, a bulwark against the encroaching darkness. But as their role in the war for humanity's survival becomes more central, the Custodes find themselves facing not only the horrors of chaos, but the overwhelming tides of alien invaders. The galaxy is full of ancient and relentless races, each with their own agendas, their own empires, and their own methods of destruction. The Adeptus Custodes must fight against enemies that have existed for millennia, enemies whose motives remain inscrutable and whose powers challenge even the might of the Emperor's chosen. The Necrons, ancient and unstoppable, move ever closer to the Imperium's borders, their legions of undying warriors unrelenting in their pursuit of their former dominance. The Tyranids, a hive mind of ravenous alien beasts, grow in number with each passing day, threatening to consume all life in their wake. And the Orcs, those brutish, violent marauders, continue to spread chaos and death wherever they roam. For each of these threats, the Custodes must adapt. The Necrons do not rely on brute force alone. They wield technology and powers that defy understanding. They are an ancient and enigmatic race, one whose motives are as difficult to fathom as their capabilities are vast. The Custodes must fight not only with their weapons and might, but with their knowledge, using every scrap of information they can glean to predict the Necrons' movements and counter their designs. Against the Tyranids, the Custodes rely on their superior training and equipment, but even their strength is tested by the mindless hunger of the alien swarm. They must fight a war of attrition, pushing the Tyranid forces back, defending the Imperium's worlds and systems from being consumed. Against the Orcs, their battle is one of sheer determination. Where the Orcs thrive on chaos, the Custodes cut through it with discipline and precision, carving their way through the madness and ensuring that the Orc hordes are beaten back. As the Custodes fight on these many fronts, the question looms, what will become of them in the end? The Imperium they have sworn to protect is a dying star, its light flickering and fading as it is consumed by its own internal contradictions and the outside forces that seek its destruction. The Custodes are acutely aware of the state of the Imperium's decline, but they remain steadfast in their belief that the Emperor's will must prevail. They are the Emperor's chosen, his living testament, and they will fight for humanity until their final breath, no matter the odds, no matter the outcome. The Custodes are not simply warriors. They are symbols of hope, of endurance, of an unwavering commitment to a vision long past its time. They are the last bastion against a galaxy that would see humanity extinguished. In this new era of war, they are forced to reckon with a galaxy far darker and more dangerous than the one they once knew. They are no longer mere guardians. They are the final defenders of the Emperor's dream. Every battle, every campaign, every act of heroism is a testament to their dedication. Even as the stars burn and the void stretches beyond the farthest reaches of the Imperium, the Custodes stand firm, unyielding in their resolve. Their role is clear: to protect, to fight, and to never surrender. And though the odds are stacked against them, though the galaxy may seem on the brink of total annihilation, the Adeptus Custodes will endure. They are not just warriors, they are humanity's last hope. As the galaxy endures the unrelenting tide of war, the Adeptus Custodes stand as both the last hope of mankind and a living embodiment of an era long gone. Their role is not one they ever sought, but one they have accepted with solemn resolve. They are the Emperor's chosen warriors, tasked with preserving his legacy and, in these dark days, defending humanity from the horrors that threaten to consume it. Yet as the galaxy burns around them, their purpose grows ever more uncertain. The threat of chaos, alien invaders, and even the very fragility of the Imperium itself has forced them to reconsider their place within the grand scheme of the universe. They are not only warriors, but symbols of humanity's final stand against oblivion. The Custodes have always been bound by duty and honor, but these values are becoming increasingly tested in an Imperium that is mired in corruption, decay, and stagnation. The Emperor's Imperium is no longer the vast, efficient empire it once was. The great bureaucracy of the Adeptus Terra has decayed, overrun by incompetence and political infighting. The Astra Militarum, the once mighty army of the Imperium, is stretched thin and often led by officers who lack the vision or skill to turn the tide of battle. The Imperium's military might has fractured, and its command structure, broken by corruption, no longer stands as it once did. As a result, the Custodes find themselves acting as both soldiers and leaders, taking on the responsibility of guiding a shattered Imperium, even as they attempt to stem the tide of its inevitable collapse. In their new role, the Custodes are more than just warriors. They are the custodians of a dying civilization. The very notion of duty that once defined them has shifted. Their oath to protect the Emperor's throne and the heart of the Imperium is as sacred as ever, but now they are tasked with preserving something that feels increasingly ephemeral: the human race itself. The Imperium, once the beacon of human progress and dominance in the galaxy, is now a fractured empire, teetering on the brink of collapse. The Imperium's borders are constantly under siege, its world slipping into chaos and anarchy as the darkness of the galaxy presses closer and closer. It is not just the might of the Emperor's enemies they must fight. It is the disintegration of the very institution they have sworn to protect. The Custodes' actions are decisive, but their efforts can often feel like a drop in the ocean. The galaxy is vast, and no matter how many battles they win or enemies they slay, the forces arrayed against them are overwhelming. The rise of chaos and the expansion of the alien Xenos empires threaten to sweep across the Imperium like a storm. Yet, as always, the Custodes stand unflinching in the face of it all. Their unwavering discipline, their strength, and their unshakable belief in the Emperor's will make them a powerful force in the galaxy. But their numbers are few, and their influence is limited. They can fight and win individual battles, but how long can they continue to hold the line when the Imperium itself is falling apart? The answer, as ever, lies in their faith. The Custodes do not fight merely for territory or for conquest. They fight because it is their sacred duty. They are the Emperor's sword, and they will not falter, no matter the odds. But even as they march into battle, their minds are not only focused on their enemies, they are also confronted with the reality of the Imperium's decline. Each victory against the forces of chaos, each alien world that they reclaim, is a temporary reprieve in the larger war for humanity's survival. The Custodes know this, and they face the grim reality that they are fighting a losing battle, not because they lack strength, but because they are up against forces that defy the natural order of existence. One of the Custodes' most difficult battles is not against the forces of chaos or alien invaders, but against the very nature of the galaxy itself. As the Emperor's chosen, the Custodes were once an extension of the Emperor's will. But as time has passed, the question of what the Emperor truly represents and what he is willing to sacrifice for his vision of humanity has become more pressing. The Emperor, once a godlike figure to the Custodes, is now a broken, imprisoned shell, his mind trapped within the Golden Throne. The Imperium, in its decay, has fallen away from the Emperor's original ideals. It is a grim, dogmatic bureaucracy, maintained not by the ideals of unity and progress, but by the fear and oppression of its leaders. The Custodes, in their own way, have come to realize that the Imperium they are defending is not the one their Emperor once envisioned. The Custodes are increasingly aware that they must take a more active role in shaping the future of the Imperium. The time for passive defense is over. Their role in the future of the Imperium may no longer simply be as guardians of Terra, but as stewards of a new vision for humanity. They must lead by example, showing humanity that there is still hope, that the Emperor's legacy is not yet lost. This shift is not without internal conflict. The Custodes' very existence has been tied to their role as the Emperor's personal bodyguards, standing as the unflinching protectors of his sacred throne. But with the Imperium in such dire straits, the Custodes must choose whether to remain static as symbols of the Emperor's past glory, or to push forward, taking a more active role in guiding the Imperium into a new future. This new vision for the future of the Imperium comes into sharper focus as the Custodes encounter the growing, interwoven threats of the galaxy. The forces of chaos, the alien Xenos, and even the warp itself are forces that the Custodes can never fully defeat. No matter how many battles they win, the dark tide will always return. It is not enough to simply fight these battles. Ultimately, the Custodes must ensure that the Imperium itself can survive in the face of these growing dangers. But the Custodes are not alone in this new role. They have formed uneasy alliances with those who share their goal of defending humanity, alliances that are forged out of necessity rather than trust. In their efforts to maintain some semblance of unity within the Imperium, the Custodes have joined forces with the Sisters of Battle, the Adeptus Sororitas, and even the Space Marines. These alliances are fraught with tension, as each group has its own agenda and views on how best to defend humanity. Yet despite their differences, they share a common cause, the survival of the Imperium and the preservation of the Emperor's legacy. These alliances, while necessary, have placed the Custodes in a difficult position. The Adeptus Custodes have always been an elite force, separate and distinct from the other warriors of the Imperium. Their unique genetic enhancements, their centuries of training, and their singular purpose have set them apart from the likes of the Space Marines or the Sisters of Battle. Yet, as the situation grows more desperate, they have no choice but to work alongside these other factions, recognizing that the survival of the Imperium depends on unity, however fragile. The Custodes' role in these alliances is one of guidance and leadership. While they do not lead entire armies, they provide the strategic vision that enables the Imperium's forces to operate as a more cohesive whole. They are the keepers of the Emperor's will, and they ensure that his vision, even in his absence, is not forgotten. But this role, one of leadership and coordination, is not one the Custodes take lightly. They are warriors, not politicians or diplomats, and their involvement in the day-to-day workings of the Imperium is a departure from their traditional function. But it is a necessary departure. As the galaxy sinks deeper into chaos and war, the Adeptus Custodes stand as humanity's last hope. Their role has evolved beyond mere guardianship. They are now the stewards of humanity's future, leaders in a war for survival that seems without end. They must adapt, evolve, and take on responsibilities they were never meant to bear. The Imperium is fractured, but it is not yet lost. As long as the Custodes stand, humanity has a chance to survive. But the question remains, can the Custodes, warriors forged for a different age, truly lead humanity to salvation in this new dark age? Or will they too fall, lost to the ravages of time and war, leaving the Imperium to fade into oblivion? As the galaxy continues to spiral deeper into darkness, the Adeptus Custodes are increasingly seen not just as warriors, but as the very last embers of a dying flame. Their role, initially one of silent guardianship, has transformed into something much greater and far more tragic. In the final moments of humanity's existence, at the very precipice of annihilation, these golden giants must decide what kind of future, if any, will emerge from the ashes of the Imperium. The Custodes' existence has always been defined by their near-perfect loyalty to the Emperor, and this unwavering devotion has been their guiding light. Yet in this age of warfare, betrayal, and political corruption, this singular loyalty is being tested as never before. The Emperor, once the beacon of reason, is now trapped in the Golden Throne, his will frozen, his body a decaying husk. The Imperium has devolved into a fractured, decaying state, an empire that clings to the ideals of a long-dead leader, unable or unwilling to adapt to the shifting landscape of the galaxy. The Custodes stand as the last living testament to the Emperor's dream, but their faith is now being called into question. Can they continue to fight for the Imperium as it exists, or must they forge a new path, one that could save humanity but potentially condemn it as well? The key question that now confronts the Adeptus Custodes is whether they can continue to defend a civilization that has abandoned the very principles the Emperor once stood for. The Imperium they protect is a bloated, inefficient bureaucracy, rife with corruption and disarray. Even the highest institutions, the Administratum, the Ecclesiarchy, the Adeptus Mechanicus, have become shadows of their former selves, caught in endless cycles of dogma, infighting, and decay. The Imperial Fists, the Blood Angels, the Space Wolves, each of the Space Marine legions has its own agenda, each driven by a code of honor that is increasingly incompatible with the reality of the galaxy. The Inquisition, meanwhile, pursues its own dark path, often with little regard for the greater good of the Imperium. The Custodes, in their wisdom, have always been the defenders of Terra and the Emperor's will, yet they are not immune to the suffering that plagues the Imperium. Their oath, once a simple and unquestionable commitment to defend the Emperor, now feels hollow. They know that the galaxy is unraveling, and that even their considerable strength cannot turn the tide of a war that spans galaxies, races, and ideologies. The forces of chaos and the alien races that threaten the Imperium are overwhelming, and the Custodes find themselves constantly on the back foot, fighting to hold the line against an enemy that grows ever more powerful. In this bleak and seemingly hopeless landscape, the Custodes are beginning to wonder if they can still fulfill their role. Can they still protect the Imperium in its current form? Or must they change their tactics, their beliefs, and their very purpose to survive in this new age of darkness? One of the greatest challenges the Custodes face is the growing divide between their mission and the political realities of the Imperium. The Adeptus Custodes have never been involved in the day-to-day workings of the Imperium's institutions. Their mission was always clear: defend Terra, protect the Emperor. But now, in a galaxy beset on all sides, they must act as statesmen, leaders, and even revolutionaries to a degree. Their actions now go beyond the battlefield. They are forced to navigate the intricate web of imperial politics and play a role in deciding the future of the Imperium. For the first time in millennia, the Custodes are not just defending their sacred duty, they are shaping the future of the Imperium itself. But this new role comes at a cost. The Custodes' reputation as the Emperor's chosen warriors is now being tested. They are seen by some as the last true defenders of humanity, but by others as relics of a bygone era, warriors who are outdated, disconnected from the realities of the galaxy they once knew. Their presence in the wider Imperium has always been rare and mystifying, and now even the few they interact with question their motives and their purpose. The Adeptus Custodes are increasingly being forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the Imperium, the Emperor, and their own place in a galaxy where the old ways no longer suffice. This growing disillusionment with the Imperium is compounded by the ongoing, ever-looming threat of chaos. The forces of the warp, long the greatest enemy of humanity, are no longer something the Custodes can fight with the same certainty. The rise of the Great Rift, the warp storms, and the endless legions of chaos gods and their minions have turned the battlefield into something almost impossible to fathom. To fight chaos is to engage with an enemy that does not follow the rules of reality. It is a force that corrupts and twists, that embodies the very worst of human nature. The Custodes are built to resist these forces, but even they cannot stand against the onslaught forever. The overwhelming power of the Chaos Gods is undeniable, and the Adeptus Custodes know that in a galaxy where chaos reigns supreme, the lines between good and evil, right and wrong, become increasingly blurred. In the face of this unrelenting wave of destruction, the Custodes must make hard choices. Do they remain loyal to the vision of the Emperor, a vision that now seems out of touch with the harsh realities of the present? Or do they adapt, take on a new role, and shape the future of humanity in a way that transcends the dogmatic ideologies of the past? As they confront these dilemmas, the Custodes begin to look beyond their traditional role as warriors of the Imperium. They must understand the importance of unity, of bringing together not only the fractured forces of humanity, but also finding a way to unite the disparate factions within the Imperium itself. The Sisters of Battle, the Astra Militarum, the Adeptus Astartes, and even the forces of the Adeptus Mechanicus, all must be unified if humanity is to stand a chance against the forces that threaten it. The Custodes, as the Emperor's ultimate champions, must not just lead by strength but by wisdom. They must unite the Imperium's fractured factions, forge new alliances, and help humanity face its greatest challenges. However, the path forward is not one of easy decisions. The Custodes know that their efforts could either save humanity or lead to its ultimate downfall. They are faced with a galaxy in chaos, with enemies on all sides and a dwindling number of allies. Yet their purpose remains unchanged, to ensure the survival of humanity and to uphold the Emperor's will, no matter the cost. In the end, the Adeptus Custodes stand as a symbol of humanity's resilience. They are the last line of defense, the golden shield that guards the Imperium from the darkness that seeks to consume it. But as the galaxy continues to crumble, as new and old forces rise to challenge the Imperium's grip on power, the Custodes must ask themselves, is there a place for them in the future of the Imperium? Or are they doomed to become a forgotten relic of a dying era? Their choices will define the future of the galaxy. Their actions will shape the course of human history, for better or for worse. But whatever happens, one thing is certain. The Custodes will never stop fighting, for they are the Emperor's chosen, and their duty to defend humanity will outlast even the darkness of the universe itself.